Your next slide. Okay, so did I already talk about how much you actually remember after a 10-minute presentation? Did I say that already? 50%.
You said, Chris.
Okay, well, people already heard this, and then after the next day, it drops down to 45, and then a week later, you're only remembering 10%. So just remember that. That's important. That's an important fact. And free admission today. And free parking. We said that. And I'll say that in LA too if you come to LA. I guarantee it. Because I think it's funny and you guys have to listen to it. What are we going to talk about next? Daily recovery rates. Daily recovery rates are not really addressed in any plan that I looked at. Pipeline plans address, the existing pipeline plans address them for production facilities in the 1960s, and the SPCC plans, I couldn't find any daily recovery rates. Daily recovery rates, tiered approach. Here's an example of a daily recovery rate for a small marine fueling facility. This is not a marine facility. This is a smaller facility, excuse me, less risk, less volume. That's an example of one on the books. 50% in 2 hours, and then after 12 hours, respond to the remaining 50%. It's a concept. It's a starting point that we'd like to show you. Like I said, on the other side, the marine side, we have immediate, we have a 2-hour requirement, we have a 4-hour requirement in high volume ports, we have a 6-hour, a 12-hour, and it goes all the way up to 60 hours. This didn't go over very well at the last one on Monday. I'll just roll that out to you right now. We need something early on to have an OSRO respond to contain, you as a plant holder, not Chris Klumpp. You as a plant holder need an OSRO to have some equipment in an area that can respond to discharge within a certain time. I'm sorry?
Or have your own equipment.
Have your own equipment. And that's the, the dedicated, non-dedicated, that's the, contract other means, right? Have an OSRO or do it yourself. This, for a small production facility, the guy that 6 barrels a day might not even need an OSRO. I mean, he might have the boom and a backhoe or whatever, and it's not gonna reach water right away. Lots of oil spill response organizations out there already kind of understand daily recovery rates. They kind of already speak the lingo of on-scene times with EDRC, boom, that stuff. Where they actually have to come from, they come from Bakersfield, they go to McKittrick. How long does it take for them to pick up boom, put it in the truck, get in the truck, get to an area where they may impact water, and corral it so it doesn't, cause more environmental damage. Hopefully that wasn't the cookies. That's really what the daily recovery rate concept is all about. It's going to be a new concept to some new pipeline operators, to rail, and to some production facilities. It's not a huge deal. It kind of revolves around the reasonable worst case spill volume, and then it's tiered. Thoughts on that?
We have some facilities that are definitely out more than 2 hours.
Right.
I mean, when you cover the state of California, there's areas when you're in the Bay Area that's going to take 3 hours to go to. But
where your OSRO comes out of, right? So you've probably talked to them and you understand that that's a pretty long drive, and they impact waters of the state.
There's a couple of else.
Right. So Joy, his comment was basically about we have some outlying production facilities.
That may have difficulties with this depending.
Right.
Okay.
So wouldn't this be for pipelines too?
It would be for pipelines too. Yep. And we have the pipeline map too that we could put up. But yes, the pipelines and the rail both have an issue with daily recovery rates that we need to take a hard look at. Where along these regions, areas, whatever we call these, where they fall, and response times. Well, we know there's plenty of OSRO response resources here and here. We've identified when this was going to happen. We started looking at those plans, and we started looking at where oil spill response contractors do business, right? So we have a good idea. We have a map similar to this on where the OSROs are. So we have a really good idea where their equipment's at, where they're headquartered out of, who might apply to be a rated OSRO. So yeah, there's going to be areas where response times might become an issue. And that might be saying to your OSRO or OSROs, I need you to move equipment over to this area. And that's difficult for OSROs that are for-profit because they have to somehow make money. They have to survive. We have lots of examples on the marine side where we created, regulations, and then there's this vacuum, and OSROs will fill that void. And whoever your contracted OSRO is, once we put this emergency reg package on the street with your input, we'll have those areas will already be addressed for the most part. So we talked a lot about containment and recovery, on-water recovery skimming capabilities. This response concept is about shoreline protection and protecting shoreline that, if you have an oil spill, might get damaged. Talked about risk and hazard analysis. On the marine side of the house, a facility has to do a what-if study, a risk and hazard analysis that identifies areas of risk at their terminal where they may have an oil spill. They put that in their plan. From that risk and hazard analysis, they do this off-site consequence analysis, and that's all that really looks at is where the oil is going to go with the most pessimistic winds and weather. So it's a series of trajectories or a trajectory that goes out from the source and all the sensitive sites that they need to protect before the oil gets there. Right? That's the off-site consequence analysis. And then the resources at risk is just the ACP on the marine side already does it. It's those sensitive species habitat that is out there that you need to protect by. On the vessel side, we used to allow them to do their own trajectories, their own off-site consequence analysis and identifying resources at risk. We sort of took that away from them and created these tables, these shoreline protection tables, which says, here's all the sites, and if you transit through this area, these are all the sites you need to protect by hour such and such. Facilities do their own because they're right there. Production facilities would do their own. We're a quarter mile away from water. It hasn't rained here in 40 years. It's going to be a tough one. It goes into the soil, so there's really no trajectory. Unless you're right by the Kern River and you're up on the hill, that you're going to have this issue. And that's at the work group we're going to have to talk about that concept of what actually a trajectory looks like, what risk and hazard analysis, like we could use that. I'm thinking I don't even think we need that. You could say this is where it's going to come out of because it's going to come out of the valve, it's going to come out of the gauge. It could be, hey, we had a blowout and the wind blew it down. I don't know. Who knows? We need that. We need help from you on that, on what a trajectory or off-site consequences would look like. Then, these response resources are what we really try to focus on. in the contingency plan world. You know, there is shoreline cleanup, which happens if you don't get boom there, people, boats in a hurry, you're going to have shoreline cleanup to do. You're going to have miles and miles of shoreline. These are the services that an OSRO will provide. Containment, booming, on-water recovery, storage, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, shoreline protection, and then the last bullet on there is Group 5 oils. Oil that is heavier than water, specific gravity greater than 1. It sinks when it hits the water. Some comment this morning was we have to heat it up to 500 and something degrees to actually move it. Well, that's, you know, it's just going to hit the ground and it's going to stay there like a big tar mat, right? So if you're a plant holder that transfers Group 5 oils, we're going to ask you to look at that because we're probably going to craft some regulations that ask you to deal with that. Temporary storage. I said some really great things about that this morning. Temporary storage. This is, you pick up oil off the water and you got to put it somewhere. That's as simple as this gets. Sometimes you pick up a lot of water with a little bit of oil. So on the marine side, we ask you to bring more than your effective daily recovery capacity, which is how a skimmer is rated. This is spills to water. And I know we're talking about spills to ground here, so obviously you need a bin and a backhoe. So you pick up your oil and you put it in a bin. This is at the minimum, the concept, the minimum storage that we're going to ask. And at the work group, we're going to ask you if that's going to be enough or not. And if that's not enough, we can go like 2 times or whatever. It's more of a cost, more of a lift for cleanup contractors and owner-operators to get storage. Because right now we have a dedicated storage requirement, which means they either have to own it or they have to have a contract with a company that puts that storage aside so they can put it somewhere. And we can look at those issues also about OWCN. Ryan already talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Yvonne, in her summary, if you have some comments about OWCN, drills and exercises. I think this is my last slide.
I think so.
Who here does drills and exercises? I haven't even asked that question yet already. Okay, so there's some companies that have plans where they test their plan to make sure it works in an emergency. And that's done by making sure that you do things like notification and staff mobilization and you know, use the unified command. And there's 15 prep objectives. And that's going to be one of the things we're going to ask production facilities and pipeline operators to do, is to do drills and exercises. We have a requirement that you tell us. This is not really a concept. This is just something that in California we want to ensure and not, you know, make you do them over and over again, but yet do them one time, make sure your plan works, and then request credit. We'll give you credit. We like to be a part. We have a really, like Ryan said, we have a really good drills and exercise program. We help design them. You know, you invite us to design them. We'll participate in that. We'll play in them. You know, it's a really good synergy that we have going on the marine side. And any plan holder that actually has done drills and exercises with us, they can help testify to that. Annual spill management team exercises. Still not a perfect world on the marine side. We still have some issues with spill management teams. We'd like to say that we've been doing this for a while and that spill management teams are on the ball. But they're not. If you have a facility and you have a spill management team, you should probably call unannounced drills on yourselves. You should probably do annual drills. You should make sure that you can manage an incident if you have an oil spill. These regulations will speak a little to that. Equipment deployments, if you own your own equipment, we would hope that on the marine side that you would know how to use that equipment, how to deploy it. Sometimes it's as simple as that. I have my own equipment. We come out there, you deploy it, we say that's great, and you're good for a year or 2 years or whatever the requirement we decide on. Almost used the clicker here. And then drill credit. I'll say it again. We're not about drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling. If you do drills on the federal side, PHMSA has a great drill program. EPA. We're in talks now, and for the unannounced drills, the EPA and the Coast Guard have this program called GUIs, Government Unannounced Initiated Exercises, I think is the acronym. And we're working together with them because plan holders don't want to keep getting drilled over and over for the same thing. And we don't want to see that. We're not staffed for that. And it's a real burden to industry. So for unannounced and announced drills and drill credit, that's really where the rubber meets the road, is this drill credit. You're going to do a drill, you're going to say we did a drill, here's what we did, you're going to submit that to us, we're going to give you a letter saying boxes all checked, great, have a great day, and you're going to be done for 3 years. That's simple. And I don't think I have anything else unless you want to ask a question about drills and exercises. Thank you. You want the lake?
No, laser, thank you.
Let's take some
Okay.
qualification.
So I know that and let's give Chris a hand. He always has the line share there. So I'm just gonna. This is an opportunity. I told you that at the end of each of these presentations there would be an opportunity for further input, and we do want that input. So I know that we already talked about reasonable worst case spill volumes before break. Is there any other information that folks want to share or you want to get on the record with Joy regarding the reasonable worst case spill volume? Okay. I know Chris talked about daily recovery rates. So conceptually about having equipment where it needs to go in a tiered time frame. Are there any specific comments that you would like to have, that you would like to tell us on effective daily recovery rates? Everybody's in a cookie coma, please.
The daily recovery rate only applies for spills on water, is that correct?
So effective daily recovery rate. Chris, would you like to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think that you're going to have to identify those areas where those spills, they get to the water also. Like you're on a hill and the water's down here. So there's going to... Sorry? Oh, yeah, on the green side, it spills to water. Yeah, on the coast. It spills water.
So we may also look at threatens to state waters, correct?
Yeah.
So if you have, as Chris said earlier, if you have a spill and you're 2 miles away from any water and it's a Group 5 oil, the likelihood it's going to get there is very, very low. So it probably doesn't even threaten state waters. But there may be areas where you spill and it's right at the top of a hill or river, and then all of a sudden it'll hit state waters in a reasonable period of time. We would call that threatened state waters.
Your daily recovery rates really are geared up to where these areas or zones or regions that we decide on, to where your algorithm can get there. And if they can get to that area already, they're pretty much covered. Right. That's where we're going with. If they can get to the middle of that in 2 hours, then all those other areas are pretty much covered. Does that make sense? Your algorithm knows that.
I think the vast majority of this valley not apply to, but there may be some regions that you're talking about.
Right.
Right. So the comment was that for a lot of these facilities, this may not apply to them, but for some regions it may. And so it all has to do with threaten or impact to state waters. And I'm sorry, Steve, you had a comment, and then I'll get you in a second.
I think at some point you need to inject some reality into this discussion. A threat to state waters, okay, whatever that might be, just because it threatens water doesn't mean that an appropriate response tool is a skimmer.
Correct.
So, I mean, it's somewhat meaningless to me if you're going to require me to have 1,000 barrels a day of recovery capacity and then expect that we roll at if there's a spill that isn't really anywhere near water.
So maybe the question is, when we're talking about concepts like effective daily recovery rate, which is geared for skimmers, we may also talk about what might be more appropriate for areas down in this area, and what that equipment might look like.
An alternative.
An alternative
Give
to
us some
skimming.
options.
Okay.
I think
Got
the
that
Oslo
right.
work group should address
Right.
those specific things, anything. What
Excellent.
kind of services should we be looking at maybe for Bakersfield?
Right.
Inland production?
So hold on to your question, sir, because I had a question back here. This lady, please. Yes.
I know that for OSPR and Fish and Wildlife, the primary focus is conserving the wildlife.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, where does that factor into this? How much responsibility are the operators going to have in taking care of any wildlife that's possibly in the way?
Okay, so the question had to do with OSPR's primary focus is in addressing protection and response to fish and wildlife resources of the state, and what responsibility will folks in this room have for wildlife affected. And you may remember Chris, and then before Chris, Brian Todd talked about the Oil Wildlife Care Network. And the Oil Wildlife Care Network is set up to address that very issue, and have been doing it on the marine side for 20 years and are recognized worldwide. So you can cite the Old Wildlife Care Network in your plan as how you are going to address oil spill cleanup for wildlife. Okay, hold on one second, sir. I have this person over here. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's going to be a difference between what you identify in your plan as, you have the capability of doing this, you contract, you potentially could respond, clean up this whole thing in 3 days if you needed to, as opposed to what happens when in the middle of June you actually have a spill, because it costs a whole lot more to go out there and clean up something in 2 or 3 days than it does to take a week or two. And in fact, in the middle of June, it may be the same place a week from now as it was 10 minutes after it happened.
So, Chris, do you want to talk about planning standards versus actual response?
Yeah, well, that's really the answer. Is that these are just preparing for an oil spill. It's just a contingency plan that says, hey, we looked at our worst case situation and planned appropriately. And then when a spill happens, they're all different. You can't really say June or what. I mean, look at the rainy season. Look, that's all you can really do as a plan holder to say this is the worst thing that can happen. And I really don't understand production facility operations, but I'm sure there's these times and these seasons that if you have a spill, bad things are going to happen. So you need to talk to your OSRO and say, bad thing, can you take care of my bad thing within a certain time frame so we know? That's all we're asking for, because once the unified command forms, they can direct and relocate resources to wherever they want to anyway, right? That's what the unified command does. They create objectives and then they strategies and tactics, right, in order to mitigate the spill incident. That's ICS. So that's why we started out by not wanting to talk about response, because it's really totally different. Planning standards, performance standards. And we have some performance standards, don't get me wrong. We have some performance standards on nodules. We have some performance standards that we call it in-house drills, and we expect them to do certain things within a certain time.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it will be addressed more specifically in these workshops.
Absolutely. We will talk about that ad nauseum.
And I'm sorry, back here, where were you? Okay. So, any other questions having to do with the concepts of effective daily recovery rate? We've already gotten comments having to do with we need to potentially look at more than on-water skimming, okay, and what would be effective for whatever kinds of events you would have down here. We had sort of the question having to do with, well, you have planning standards by certain periods of time, but then you have actual response. And actual response, decisions are made within the unified command. Is there anything else that folks want to talk about or bring information having to do with effective daily recovery rates? Yes, please.
Will the OSRO have to be a rated OSRO, or can we use our own contractors who have many years of experience out in the oil fields out here, they know how to respond? Mm-hmm. Does it have to be an OSRO who has to respond for the planning purposes, or can we include our current contractors in the
Chris?
planning.
Yeah, we're going to capture that, and that came up, and that's going to come up is, do we want to rate OSROs like we do on the marine side? It's to your benefit as a plan holder that you have a rated OSRO, someone that you can depend on, someone that's tested, inspected by the states or the feds. The Coast Guard, EPA are all on board with that. But is that necessary in Bakersfield?
Very good.
It's a great question, and we really need to look at that in the OSRO.
Okay, excellent. Yes, please.
I guess I will ask this question
Yes.
with regards to the wildlife, following up on the previous question. Are they prepared? Because we're out here in the desert
Right.
and can be quite a ways away from the coast where they're used to handling most of that. Are there facilities inland
Right.
that we would have to go to or contract? If we're supposed to contract with these folks, timing becomes an issue. Right?
Absolutely. So, and I should have brushed up on these numbers. So the Oil and Wildlife Care Network has between 23 and 30, but they just added a few facilities up and down the state. Most of them are on the coast, absolutely. But they got an additional amount of funding to address inland oil. Okay, and so specifically, they will probably be working with rehab groups inland. We may end up building additional facilities inland. What we have on the marine side, we base it sort of on a hospital concept. You know, you have those really, really, really big hospitals, and then you have all those small triage units. And the triage units sort of stabilize the animals and then send them to the big hospitals. The big hospital we have, one is in Northern California in Cordelia, the one in Southern California is in San Pedro. And then OWCN within the network also works with Hub SeaWorld, they work with Humboldt State, they have a lot of other facilities. And so they will be looking at how to leverage that and bring it inland. They also have mobile facilities that they can bring down to do some of that triage down here until there has been an expansion up into the inland environment. Just hold on 1 second. Yes.
I just want to expand on that.
Yeah.
We do have local biologists, 2 of them here, we're both OWCN trained.
Excellent.
And we volunteer at IBR down in San Pedro,
Okay.
so we do handling. And you know, we also are certified wildlife rehabilitators. So within Bakersfield, there is already that group set up through OWCN and stuff.
So how do we connect with that? If we're supposed to contract with OWCN,
So in an event, let me just talk quickly about it in an event. So let's say in your plan, you've identified Oil and Wildlife Care Network as your rehab, as how you're going to address this, okay? The gun goes off, there's an event, OES is notified, OSPR is notified. We would notify OWCN and say, we've got this event, you need to roll. If they already have records that they've trained folks here in Bakersfield to address that, they can call them and say, we are sending down a triage unit, we are sending down this, we need you to staff up this, we need you to do that until we are able to get there. And we're speed. And also, at the time of an event, OWCN will actually come to the responsible party and say, this is what we are doing, you need to sign the contract. So, I'm sorry. I don't want to be a talking head up here. I just want to make sure that we answered your question. Okay. But yes.
Since you've been doing this for so long, part of our comments may be in response to what your known costs are, you've identified the contract. Is that information you can tabulate and provide us as to, here's an example of what a type of facility might have to contract with someone? I mean, you're covering marine terminals, offshore oil platforms.
You're talking about for Oil and Wildlife Care Network specifically, or
Just as far as even the response contractors, not just wildlife.
Oh.
Yeah.
You'd have to actually call them and ask them what it would take to cover here. And you can see we haven't even established any volumes or on-scene times yet, so it's really hard to get a good idea what they're actually going to charge.
So you have no idea, say, what marine terminals or offshore operators currently in the area where you have responsibilities, what they are having to pay to contract with these agencies?
Why would we know that?
So,
I'm gonna throw it back at you. I mean, that's between you and the OSRO. I can tell you, I can throw out some prices, but really what they charge you to do your line of business and what they charge somebody else. You have OSROs in the room. There's one right there. There's one right. You know,
Let me take
you could ask them what they're kind of their to sign up online and be covered, and it's $500, right, Steve?
Well, I would like to, I'll make a comment.
okay, hold on. Go ahead, Steve.
If we understood what the requirements were going to be and what the heck we had to perform to meet your requirements, we could probably tell you. But that's kind of why we're here, is to understand where we're going with what it's going to take to meet the requirements. So
Yeah, we try to stay out of it.
I understand there are specific facility costs, and you know what you're doing. My question's an order of magnitude question. As you said, that's not your concern, that's ours.
Well, but I do think it's worth saying that the emergency regulations do not have to identify those costs because they're considered emergency, right? But when we go through the permanent reg package that is not emergency, we will have to document what the impact is going to be on industry and different kinds of industry, what this requirement is going to cost them within the ballpark, what this requirement is going to cost them in the ballpark. Because even though we cannot use a strict cost-benefit analysis, we do need to be accountable for what it is going to cost industry to do it. That won't be happening in the emergency package, but it will be happening in the final package.
Let me give you an example. I didn't mean to be so target on that. There are some OSROs.
We are looking at the bottom line.
Absolutely. There are some OSROs that they cover you for free as long as you call them when you have an OSRO.
Who's not the first
Well, yeah,
I
there's
didn't
probably
make that
really
up.
no free
That's
lunch.
an absolute fact.
They don't
They'll
contract.
contract for free, and then if you have a spill, you call them. So that's their business. There are some, like in Port Hueneme, that because they're the only game in town, charge another price. Right? So your location, your volumes, the equipment they have to pre-position, the people they have to pre-stage to meet those requirements. There's so many little devils in the details that to give you an amount would be really, really difficult.
But I am mindful of what Steve said, and that is that until we flesh out what those details really will be, not just on water skimming, but any of a number of other types of equipment or conceptually what we want you to be able to do, clean up the sanded area, etc. Until we're able to get those determinations, the OSROs will be able to tell you what that's going to cost them. And so that's beholden upon us to figure that out, to be as clear as possible.
And it might be free if you do it yourself.
So, Chris mentioned this earlier, and I just wanted to make sure, again, the sign-up sheets are out on the table, but more importantly, not that the sign-up sheets aren't important, they are important, because that is the way that we are getting in touch with you. But if you are interested in being involved in providing more specific input on any of a number of these topics, please, please, please put your name down on the specific work groups. Okay? So, any other questions or comments on effective daily recovery rate? Going once? Twice? I know that there was some discussion on sensitive site protection. Chris talked a lot about plan holders having to take a look at their own facilities or their own pipelines and where the risks might come from, and then figure out what the risks might pose to fish and wildlife. We appreciate that in a perfect world, we already have these excellent geographic response plans, and you can just point to those geographic response plans. That's where we'd like to be in the future, but right now we're not there. So any additional questions or comments that we haven't already captured on sensitive site protection? Once? Twice? Okay. Drills. Chris talked about, announced and unannounced drills, and all of us being incredibly mindful that the whole point of drilling is to make sure that the plan is worth the paper that it's written on, and people have demonstrated their ability to respond. Okay, you don't have to do that 57 times in a month, right? Once is sufficient. If you're being called on by Dogger or by a local agency to do it, EPA, and it meets our objectives, that's good enough for us. You will have to demonstrate that you've done it, and somebody agrees that it meets those objectives. Any other questions or concerns on drills? Please.
In the bill, I believe it doesn't require annual drills. Is this something that you're going to have with yourself, or comes out of something else?
So these drill requirements, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, what we covered is what we have in the marine zone.
So that's something negotiable.
That would, right, taking a look at what we have. And so again, the drill work group, please. Because again, we want something reasonable. Selfishly for us, as well as for you, right? Nobody wants to try and implement something that doesn't make sense or is not implementable. Anything else on drills? Going once? Twice? Okay. We are in the home stretch. Where is mine? So the next presentation is on certificates of financial responsibility. We have Mike Zamora here, who has worked with OSPR for the last 4 years and is in our certificate of financial responsibility group. After Mike, we will again have do you have any questions, concerns, input? And then I will wrap up today's session with what you can expect from us. What are the next steps? How